Hey, what's up, everybody? We have a new YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe right now. Leave a comment on the video. Share it with your friends. It's also a podcast, 3 and Out, wherever you listen with me, John Middlekauff, Apple, Spotify. We have you covered, as well as thevolume.com. We have merch. Check out. I got 3 and Out hats right now. Thevolume.com. Search the podcast. Buy some merch. Okay, Middlekauff mailbag time. At John Middlekauff is my Instagram. DMs wide open. Fire in them. You guys know the drill. Let's try to fire through as many of these as we can. I'm a huge Niner fan. Just curious if you think their window is closed somewhat following this loss. Obviously, it's tough to predict these things, but you imagine having an aging squad and suffering three straight tough losses. I still think the majority of their core guys are still under 30, right? Debo, Fred, Bosa. Trent is old, but he still plays at a high level. Ayuk, they plan on keeping. Hufanga will be back from injury. Ward is still really good at corner. The Dre Greenlaw Achilles really hurts because I think realistically you have to look at this year like he's not going to be around. But that's football. And anytime, you're not guaranteed shit the next year. The Chiefs won the Super Bowl, and this year was a struggle for them. Now, their trump card always is their quarterback. And obviously, they still have Travis Kelce and Chris Jones, but those guys are getting up there in age. If you have a great coach and you have a great culture, now the 49ers, Brock Purdy's going to have to prove to do this over and over and over again, but he doesn't make any money. So if Brock Purdy is just a solid quarterback, given the flexibility you have with his contract, you have room to make moves. And one thing that was pretty evident in the Super Bowl is the reality with the 49ers is they went 2 years without having a first-round pick. And it showed in that game. We talked about it earlier this week that, the Chiefs had higher-end young talent because they drafted McDuffie 2 years ago. They drafted Karlaftis. Having some high picks helps you hit on impact starters who don't make much money. Spags gets an extension. What is he making a year for turning Andy's team into a defensive juggernaut? I would say anything less than like $5 million would be underpaid. To me, Andy Reid's a $25 million head coach, and Spags a $5 million coordinator. Now, I don't know how much they actually make, but that's the value of those two guys. What number could I tell you Andy Reid was making that you would feel he's underpaid? Beside a couple of the high-end quarterbacks, how many players in the NFL are worth more than Andy Reid? If you paid Andy Reid $35, it's not a salary cap position, so who cares? He's worth a lot. Spags is worth a lot. And now the Chiefs are worth a lot because they're winning a lot of Super Bowls. Any thoughts on the staff being put together in Washington? Well, I saw today that they hired Anthony Lynn as their run game coordinator. He's coming from San Francisco with Daryl Tapp as well. I think Anthony Lynn is a fantastic assistant coach. He's a fantastic guy to have on your staff. Didn't like him as a head coach, but we've talked about this over and over. Just because you're not a great head coach does not mean you're not a good coach. So that's a good hire. Daryl Tapp, a guy that when I was with the Eagles was one of our defensive linemen. Jim Washburn loved him. I always, as a player, he's just a solid player. But clearly he's been with the 49ers for a while now. Anytime you get an assistant coach who's like an assistant line coach, an assistant O-line coach, a assistant linebacker coach for years who's part of somewhere successful, especially a guy who's a former player, that's a solid hire. Obviously, Dan Quinn, we've talked about before. The key with that hire in Washington, they're not trying to win the Super Bowl the next couple of years. They're just trying to be credible. They're trying to have back-to-back 9 or 10 win seasons and be in the wild card mix. So when you looked at the landscape, once the Ben Johnson thing kind of unraveled, I can't hate it. I just don't know there are other options. So, yeah, I like what they're doing. I'm obviously a big believer in Adam Peters. I think you guys got a stud general manager. And listen, your owner, now it's a completely different industry because it's a different sport, but has a proven track record of hiring guys who have had experience. Now, basketball is different. If you have Joel Embiid, you're guaranteed to not suck. Football is hard. Regardless of who they end up picking with the number 2 pick, whatever quarterback they choose, there's no guarantee that guy's going to be any good. Zero. It's the hard part about the sport. And when the video comes out of them drafting Drake May or Jaden Daniels or whoever they pick, Bo Nix, the celebration in that draft room is going to be ecstatic. And then a couple years later, we'll judge, right? Because there is never a draft room where you make a pick, especially high, where the room is not really happy. So it's going to come down to me on the coaching staff, whether they get the quarterback right. And that does not mean they need to find Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes or even, Justin Herbert or Jalen Hurts. Just get a solid guy. If you just get a solid quarterback, you can build a franchise around them and be competitive. Andy Reid's tenure in Kansas City started with Alex Smith. He did not have Patrick Mahomes. So they would die for Alex Smith. Hell, they had him, and he was playing good until the leg injury happened. I heard in a recent vid you were going to go to the Combine. I live in Indy and have my whole life. If you're looking to have an expensive dinner, I've been there 3 or 4 times in my life now. Check out the Eagle's Nest, otherwise known as the restaurant that rotates. Everything on the menu is great and is the best restaurant in the city. I'm going to write that down. Eagle's Nest. Question for the mailbag, or if you just want to answer. Is there any chance the Niners try to team up the Bosa brothers and go for Joey? No. 1, he makes too much money. 2, if you're the Chargers, you've paid him all this money and he is a high-end player. Even though he's injured a lot, I think you would still just keep. So I wouldn't expect Bosa to be on another team. I think Joey Bosa is going to be on the Chargers next year. Khalil Mack now, that's another story. Colin had this random thought, this from River. He threw out on his show years ago, not a topic or anything, but just a statement he made in response to something else. He said he thought NFL teams should be allowed 1 player that doesn't count against the cap. Now, I'm sure he was talking about quarterbacks, but my twist would be, could any player, any position, the money to pay them would come out of the ad TV money that they get every year, which is over $400 million. The drawback to ensure teams don't just do it willy-nilly is that their player turns out to be not worth it and they decide to cut him or trade him. The entirety of the salary is guaranteed if they cut him and 75% if he's traded. So it's not going to kill the rest of your team, but you're going to have to use other money to cover your mistake. Obviously, teams with quarterbacks or generational talents would use this, but it would help the best teams keep their good teams intact. Your thoughts? I would say here's the thing about the NFL. How many teams that have a star player ever lose them that want to keep them? Never happens. The Packers, who don't have an owner, had 30 plus years of Favre and Rodgers. Every team that has a star player, if they want to keep that player, keeps that player. How many all-time great players don't get a second contract with their team? It's very, very rare. When Khalil Mack was traded from the Raiders, it was unheard of. I think it was the first time a multiple-time All-Pro had been traded before like his 5th year. So that's never going to happen. I think it's fair to say. So I hear what you're saying, but it's for whatever reason, it's just not going to happen. So I'm not going to spend much time on it. I think in basketball and football, you should have someone you draft. If I draft Steph Curry, Nick Bosa, whoever, TJ Watt, you go through the teams, and I want to keep that player on Lane Johnson, and he's like my cornerstone player. It could be a quarterback, could be any position, like you said. That would be an incredible mechanism that you get the benefit of drafting and developing. To me, it should be a player you draft. Like the 49ers shouldn't be able to use it on Trent Williams, right? But if they wanted to use it on Nick Bosa, they should be able to. If the Rams want to use it on Aaron Donald, they should be able to. They get credit for making that move. I got a question regarding my team, the Arizona Cardinals. Is there hope or any reason for optimism for this coming season? Kyler is back, excuse me. Hopefully we grab Harrison Jr. and we play hard. still feels like we're 2 or 3 defensive stoppers away from being competitive. I'd love your thoughts. I think they got a pretty long way to go. I think they are more than just a player or two away. So I would say I hear what you're saying, but I think you're probably 2 drafts away from being competitive as a playoff team. Kyler showed a lot of life, though, last year. The talent on your offense is pretty shitty. So hitting on a wide receiver, but let's face it, like most wide receivers aren't catching 90 balls as a rookie. Like what Puka did is not normal. So I would say this draft, if you can get back to like 7, 8 wins, but look really competitive, and then the following year should be like in 2025, we start talking about a potential playoff team. I agreed with you all year when you said Wilks wasn't quite as good as Ryans or Salo. But in the Super Bowl, his defense held the Chiefs to 3 points in the first half, then only gave up a touchdown in regulation when his defense was forced to go back out on the field after a punt hit off the dude's foot, and McLeod didn't fall in. I thought he called a masterful game on those things alone. I think the 49ers offense needed one more field goal drive or even just one more first down on the last drive, and they win the game. And if that's the case, I think Wilks is a big reason as any of the 49ers, a big reason as for the 49ers winning the Super Bowl. Listen, the 49ers offense had issues in that game, but you're not firing Kyle Shanahan. Christian McCaffrey fumbled. You're not firing Christian McCaffrey. It wasn't just that game, which in the biggest spots, he got smoked. The Chiefs offense isn't that good. They had scored 17 points the previous week. This isn't, now they were playing the Ravens, but this isn't super dynamic 35-point a game offense. This is a team that won a lot of games scoring 19 points. So when you're in these big spots with the game on the line, and you have how many 3rd and 5s, 3rd and 6s did they get with ease with the game on the line? No one, as someone that does this for a living, I watch a lot of football on Sunday, right? From the start, when games kick off at 11 till the last game ends. We don't talk that much about first halves. I enjoy watching them, but the majority of the story for a game that we talk about as fans, as podcasters, even as coaches, come down to the second half. Because the overwhelming majority of games, I think like well over 80%, are a 1-score game going in the fourth quarter. So schematically adjusting, making sure you get big spots is a huge part of any coach's job. Okay, from Buckets. Question. Seattle hired Mike Mack. Now Ryan Grubb. How do you feel about the hires? We drafted a quarterback. Outlook for the franchise, positive. Yeah, I mean, I like to hire, get a guy that I knew someone on the Ravens staff. They called him Boy Genius. So listen, it's risky hiring young people, right? In any industry, especially in football when a guy's just been a coordinator. You have no clue. It's kind of like the draft. Obviously, on paper, he looks fantastic. Worked in Michigan, kicked ass. Worked with the Ravens, kicked ass. I watched his press conference. I wouldn't call him stiff, but he didn't feel like Mr. Personality, but maybe that was just small sample size. Like to hire a lot. I mean, I think it's pretty good. Here's the thing, though. You know, he's going up against Shanahan and McVay now as the head coach. He's no longer just the defensive coordinator. The other thing, I'm pro Ryan Grubb. I mean, if you couldn't watch him in college and not think, this guy's fucking unbelievable. He has never worked in the NFL. So it's a calculated risk. It is. I like taking calculated risks. I'm all for it. But tough division. You know, the Rams are coming. The 49ers are really good. Conference isn't as strong, but it's a good job. A lot of pieces. A lot of pieces on offense for Grubb. I do think you'll draft a quarterback. I kind of expect you to trade up and get a quarterback, but you never know. I thought they'd take Anthony Richardson last year, trade up and try to be aggressive, and then they just sat and they took Witherspoon. Maybe they would have taken Richardson if he would have fell to 5. I know there have been a lot of reports over the years, but you never really know after the fact. But Witherspoon's a stud. We saw what McDonald did with Kyle Hamilton, so I wouldn't expect that to stop now. Could finally stomach the idea of Super Bowl content 48 hours after. Just caught the first hour of your instant reaction with Colin. When he essentially says something along the lines of the tape is out on Purdy and teams know the best way to get pressure on him. Oh, the best way to get to him is pressure. He does get that Purdy led the league in QBR versus pressure. No. I believe he is specifically referring to the third down late in the fourth quarter and the third down in overtime when the 49ers didn't convert on, both of which included missed blocks, leaving him essentially one-on-one with a pass rusher. Not sure those qualifies as examples supporting the blanket statement Colin is making. This is not a Purdy argument, although impressive stuff, 1.5 years in, just seems like Colin is making a blanket statement because of two specific plays. Maybe I was misunderstanding a statement. Yeah, I can't speak for Colin. Here's what I know. When you block up pressure on Purdy and he has a little time, he's proven to be really good. But one thing I think he's going to struggle, or he has struggled with, he can make plays with his legs. But because of his height limitation, when they blitzed him sometimes, and a lot of the blitzes that hit home were because no one was blocked or an oncoming rusher was coming and he had to get rid of the ball fast. It is where his height limitations limit his ability to see stuff, which is always going to be an issue. Patrick Mahomes, you're playing a magician who, no matter where you brought pressure, he knew exactly where to go. Purdy can get rattled a little bit, regardless of the stats, when you start hitting him like any quarterback. And physically, he's just not tall enough to see and throw it into pressure because he's a smaller guy. I put this less on Purdy and more on Kyle. Get him moving. If they're bringing people and you can't block Chris Jones, use the guy's athleticism. What did Andy do with the game on the line? Got Mahomes moving. Why? Mahomes is a good athlete. Purdy's not Peyton Manning. And sometimes Kyle played him like that in that specific game when they couldn't fucking block these guys. So get him on the move. Some of Purdy's best plays in that game. Moving around as an athlete. Do I think Purdy is like going to sit in the pocket like Phillip Rivers? It's harder for him when he's getting hit because of his size, and it's hard for him to see. Get in on the action with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. New customers who deposit $5 or more can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,000 back in a bonus bet. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN. New customers can get a no-sweat bet up to $1,000 if your first bet loses. Only on DraftKings Sportsbook with code JOHN. The crown is yours. From Eugene, Oregon. Love 3 and Out and go low. Keep up the good work. My question that I feel like no one has really talked about other than Romo mentioning it during the game comes from the defensive strategy in both the final drive of the Niners in the fourth quarter and honestly, even the last overtime drive as well. Why were the 49ers playing so soft, letting Kansas City get the yards and get a field goal late? I see it all the time in the regular season. I kind of get it, but this is the freaking Super Bowl. I'm not saying they should blitz the house, clearly, because Kyle would call timeouts. But the D-line was just playing so well. Why not just run normal base defense that was working of having the backers and other guys play 8-yard back? The Chiefs not only got into field goal range in a short amount of time using one field goal, but also Kansas City had the potential to score. I totally agree. Prevent defense fucking stupid when your defense is playing well. Prevent defense with 20 seconds left and they're at the 20-yard line. They don't have any timeouts. Totally get it. When you got to go the whole length of the field and you got Patrick Mahomes and you're playing off and just killing grass, it's just that 7 yards back, 3 yards over, get to my spot. That is so dumb. You're going up against the greatest offensive coach since Bill Walsh and one of the great quarterbacks we've ever seen, and you're just going to play prevent defense? They worked right down the field. Totally with you. I hated it. Probably why the guy doesn't have a job. I mean, seriously. It was, you basically were just giving them the field goal. And because of the team you're playing, even with their offensive limitations, like, guys, they might walk-off touchdown. A walk-off touchdown in regulation, to me, would have been 10 times worse than in overtime. And it was bad in overtime. It was really bad. but in regulation, that would have been the worst loss I've ever seen. Everyone's angry that the Niners lost, including myself. People want to point fingers, and that's fine. However, you just did a video about Shanahan and how you believe in him. I do as well. But I have 2 questions. Why has nobody ever really made it a point to really point out how bad the O-line is? I think we talk about the O-line all the time. They have Trent Williams, who's one of the greatest tackles of all time, and then a bunch of replaceable pieces. I think that's pretty well discussed. I think that's a point of conversation around the 49ers at all times. Now, it's hard. You invest, and this is where it gets back to, they didn't have the draft picks. I would guess over the last couple of years, what would they have used one of those first-round draft picks on? Probably an offensive lineman. But you trade for Trey Lance. Like, the trade for Trey Lance wasn't just missing on Trey Lance. It was the cost to acquire him. It was 2 other first-round picks that they could have drafted a center, drafted a guard, drafted a tackle. They didn't have the fucking ammunition. It was really a double whammy. At least with Christian McCaffrey, you trade a second, a third, and a fourth, which is a lot of draft capital. You get Christian McCaffrey. So I think Howie Roseman said this a couple years ago. Every team has the same amount of equity or, capital. Excuse me, capital. Not every team has the same amount of equity. Obviously, different teams valued at different numbers. But every team has the same amount of draft capital and money. You just choose how to invest it. Every team, if you started at scratch, has a first-round pick, a second-round pick, a third. Teams trade it. Teams trade back. Teams, have the same amount of salary cap space. You just determine how you want to invest it. And the 49ers made a move, and it was a devastating move. That luckily, the football gods gave them Purdy as a bailout. But missing those 2 first-round picks has an impact. Like, McDuffie just didn't come out of the sky. And Karlaftis, that's the Miami trade. I think McDuffie was the Miami draft pick. Karlaftis was the Chiefs. But that matters. How the F did Stuckey call overtime? He just said that his guy had just saw an inefficiency, right? It's just when you get a number that's a little off, you're like Cam Young. Finished really high at Riviera 2 years ago. He's playing well right now. He's a Ryder Cupper. He's legit. He's 35-1 right now. Like, those odds are out of whack. He should be like 22-1. So what did I do? Put $100 on him. You don't know it's going to hit. You just see value. And that's what I think Stuckey's guy saw, value. I started podcasting 10 months ago and followed your advice on consistency. I've been diligent, putting out 1 episode per week and 4 short-form videos. While my usual podcast topics from real estate sales, entrepreneurship, to hobbies like snowboarding and paintballer. I used to play a little paintball back in high school. Had a spider. Those guns were sweet. A few weeks ago, I ventured into sports content with my first ever episode, which performed exceptionally well. Across various platforms and content types, I'm averaging around 150,000 views per month. Proud, but not satisfied. My ultimate goal is to make podcasting my full-time job because I love being a content creator. So here are my questions. Should I focus solely on creating sports content and stop making content about random stuff? Should I reach out to companies for podcast sponsorship now to make it my main source of income, offsetting my W-2, or should I focus on growing my following more before pursuing sponsorship partnership opportunities? Just for context, I'm 30, recently married, working at a Fortune 500, in sales, making almost $200K. Guy's fucking crushing. I enjoy my 9 to 5 with my wife, and I own 5 rental properties. Holy shit. My man's crushing. My advice would simply be this. I would not give up your W-2 job until you start getting a steady stream coming from this. You're making too much money to just quit cold turkey if you can keep putting in time and doing this on the side. It's actually the best way to start a future gig, is to have a gig that's making money. You can work on the side and build it up. My advice with anything with content creation or videos or podcasts, whatever works, and resonates, like ultimately, I like talking about this, but if no one listens, who cares? And I talk about football because it works, right? So whatever's working for you, do the majority of that. I understand that golf content isn't 1/100th. Did I speak correctly? 1/100th of the power of football. But I love it. I know there is an audience and I enjoy it. But I would be stupid to flip it around and do 5-to-1 ratio golf to football, right? So I know it's why we do majority of football content here. So when something works, double and triple down on it. It doesn't mean you can't still do, if you like doing podcasts on snowboarding or paintballing or real estate, you own 5 real estate properties. You bring value talking about it to people. Hell, how many people that are interested in like, God, I want to get something to rent out? You can talk about it. The positives, the negatives, the costs, the benefits, how to find tenants, how to find management companies. Do you manage it? Like, it's interesting. But if it's not really working, ride what's working. And then just continue to kind of do that on the side in terms of your pie chart of what you're talking about. Do the majority of that pie chart on what is getting traction. And then from there, just try to build up and see where it goes. That would be my advice. Because if you spend a lot of time doing stuff that's not working, the best part about this world that we live in, you can change at a moment's notice. If something works, double down. If it's working for a while and then stops working, try something else. You could be very fluid. Do you think it makes more sense? So congrats on your life, though. You sound like you're crushing. I definitely was not doing that well at 30 years old. I'll promise you that. Do you think it makes more sense for the Chiefs to go after a big-time wide receiver in free agency or stick with building wide receiver depth? Wide receiver depth has been an issue the last 2 seasons since the Tyreek Hill trade. However, it seems that Veach may hit the jackpot with Rice and was a second-round pick last year. Curious your thoughts. Well, the best wide receiving crew the Patriots ever had, they never won a Super Bowl. They had arguably the second best receiver of all time and one of the great NFL players ever and lost in the Super Bowl. So just because you have a great wide receiver doesn't, and they had Welker, who was easily one of the great slot receivers and one of the most productive receivers we've ever seen in his peak. So it doesn't guarantee you anything. Look at the Colts all those years of having sweet wide receivers. It's not like they won 4 Super Bowls. What I would imagine Andy's going to do is they're going to keep investing in the offensive and defensive lines. And, if Rice takes a step, draft another wide receiver in the second round, and just keep kind of build that way. Sign a tight end. Where I think they're going to benefit is because of their situation, guys are going to want to be a part of the Chiefs. So players are, I think, maybe I'm wrong, going to want to take a little less to be part of the operation that's working. That's what I would imagine is going to happen. That they can get, I just keep saying this name. I haven't even looked at the free agent options. But Mike Evans, could they get him a little cheaper because he wants to play with Patrick? Would he sign a 1-year deal? I don't know. I mean, he's going to have options. He was really good. But you know what I'm talking about. I've heard the suggestion of making the Monday after the Super Bowl into a national holiday. Another option would be to play the game on Saturday rather than Sunday. Sunday's a better TV day. So the reason Sunday Night Football is the #1 show in America is just think about it. The overwhelming majority of people home. Friday night and Saturday night are not great TV nights. Now, I'm home a lot, but there's a reason that if you put football games on the same football game on Saturday night and the same football game on Sunday night, more people are going to watch on Sunday night. So listen, to make something a national holiday, I never expect that to happen, though that'd be awesome. Even though I never really drink during Super Bowls, except the one I went to when I got pretty wasted. But I don't never expect that day to be a national holiday. That's something a lot of people in sports media and sports fans say. But it's never happening on Saturday night ever. No chance. It would take like a natural disaster or something. But even then, like the game is always going to be scheduled on Sunday. I guess the only way possible if there was a new stadium and it's outdoors and like a hurricane was going to hit, I guess it could happen in Miami. And if the hurricane was going to hit Sunday, obviously it's not really hurricane season, but you know what I mean. What are your thoughts about Harbaugh's staff? Minter and Roman, plus the linebacker he coached for the 49ers. Navarro Bowman, for like a 2-year stretch, is one of the best players I've ever seen. Now, his career in the peak was very short-lived. He had an awful injury against Seattle where he basically had his knee snapped. But I'm telling you, Navarro Bowman in his prime, elite. So very, very cool that he's added Navarro to his coaching staff. Minter, Michigan just shattered a record. The Joe Burrow LSU national championship team sent 16 guys to the NFL Combine, which is insanity. This Michigan team has 18 guys going. They're sending 6 offensive linemen. They have 9 offensive and defensive linemen going. Obviously, Blake and JJ, some DBs, 6 offensive linemen going to the Combine. That's insane. So whoever Harbaugh's going to hire, I would have faith. Everyone's like, Greg Roman, he sucks. Well, he sure won a lot of games with Jim Harbaugh in San Francisco the first time. Sure had some success with Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. No one's acting like he's Bill Walsh, but let's not act like the guy's the village idiot. So I think the Chargers are going to be good. Do you post your golf picks? Yeah, I post them on, I have an Instagram account that's just Go Low Pod. I post them there. I post them on my own Instagram account. They're posted right now. I'm a New Englander, so I obviously rooted for the Pats. And I'm juxtaposing the Pats dynasty versus the Chiefs dynasty. And what led the Pats to fall was Belichick's ego. As the Bible says, pride cometh before destruction. He had to have complete control. The one thing I'd push back, he always had complete control. And that was like part of their success. And led him to being the worst GM in the NFL. Drafting busts like N'Keal Harry, Cyrus Jones, Isaiah Wynn. He literally traded down to take Cole Strange. And the Chiefs used that draft pick to take Trent McDuffie. The Chiefs have a great thing going with Andy Reid. And Colin plays a great DC in Steve Spagnuolo, who will never be a head coach. And an elite GM in Brett, who drafts great players. Instead of Andy taking control and his egomaniac like Belichick. It worked for a long time with Bill. It really did. Bill's ultimate downfall, obviously as a GM, he was very hit or miss. And one of Andy's great strengths is when he left Philly to go to Kansas City, he said, I don't want to be the GM anymore. So you deserve credit there. But it wasn't until they got Patrick Mahomes that they started winning. I think they only won 1 playoff game with Alex. Now, they were really good. They were winning 11, 12, 10 games every year, going to the playoffs all the time. But you need a great quarterback. And once you get the great quarterback, like you're going to have some whiffs too. Bill's ultimate downfall, if they had Tom Brady this year at 46, they probably win 8-9 games. He told Tom Brady, we don't want you anymore. Like that was it. It wasn't all the draft busts. He had draft busts in 2006 and 2010 and 2013. It was Tom. His decision on Tom Brady, which, let's face it, how many coaches and GMs in the history of the league would have been like, this is kind of crazy. He's 42 years old. Now, the thing is, like, Billy wasn't even making much money. He didn't want $40 million a year. So, to me, the number one thing to get down on Belichick isn't N'Keal Harry and some of these Cole Stranges. Every coach and GM have had those. Brett Veach has missed on guys. It happens. It was the Tom Brady decision. And when you make the wrong quarterback decision, especially with the greatest quarterback of all time, you're going to get fucked in some way, some form or fashion, especially when you have no backup plan. When he told Tom to kick rocks, they didn't have a quarterback on the roster. They had to sign Cam Newton that year over the summer. And the following year, they had to draft Mac Jones. So that ultimately was Bill's downfall. But I agree. One of Andy's great strengths in Kansas City has been putting his ego to the side and letting guys help him out. And that was an element to Bill when it came to Tom that he could not get out of his own way.